I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, I'll take one. Thank you.
I already took some.
Appreciate it.
I took my
Good policy tonight. Good policy tonight too.
I tried to do my part.
Yeah, I didn't have I didn't have too many. My things were like punctuation errors or spacing errors.
Yeah.
Excuse me? Nice.
Did you lose something?
It'll turn green and then you're able to talk into it. Unfortunately, they're not the best. Sometimes you have to really get close to it.
So does everybody turn around?
It's familiar.
All right. So we're going to hold off.
I gave you that. Yes?
Remember to remind him about holding to the 3 minutes.
I have it, yes.
Okay.
To Karen, she's like the second speaker, has like 10 seconds. So sorry.
Okay. Can I sit this down? Okay, I'm gonna have it ready.
And then same with when we get to the workshops, just remind them to hold.
Right, I will. I'll hold the questions. And if it gets too late, maybe we could throw off the policies and do it next time.
Good.
I don't know. We'll see how.
Okay.
I looked at it. Didn't look like there was much to discuss. So. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting back to order and ask those who are willing and able to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to remind everyone to turn on their microphones. And I'd like to start with introductions. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Laird, Board President. To my left is
Bo Wright, Superintendent of Schools.
George DeMarteau, attorney for the district.
Good evening, Nikki LaPlaca, board member.
Hello, James O'Brien, board member.
Hi, Emery Straczynski, board member.
Pat McHugh, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources.
Dina Wilson, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction.
Good evening, Andy Whitmore, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations.
Good evening, Noah Selma, Assistant Superintendent of Student and Family Services. Hi, Sarah Warren, Student Representative.
Hi, Doug Rivers, new board member.
Good evening, Diane McBride, board member.
Hi, everyone. Karen Flanagan, School District Clerk.
Good evening, May Abdullah, board vice president.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to start with our report from our student representative, Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Digital Citizenship Week is starting in February, and this year students, including myself, have been involved in the making of these videos. We've asked students on plan what a PBIS trait means to them. One student informed how being respectful means considering others' privacies online and to treat others how you want to be treated. Many other videos will be coming out soon. The positivity wall has been officially posted and it's doing great. Students expressed their positive view in Rush-Henrietta and were innovated in their honest opinions. Lastly, we are planning a green week. Each day the topics contrast, but raise awareness on the environment. For example, students will create posters to enlighten the school about our climate. That's all for the student report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. This brings us to our public forum. At this portion of the meeting, at this portion of the public forum is for any item that is not on our agenda. If there is anyone who'd like to speak on a topic at the agenda, please wait until the presenter finishes speaking, and we will call on you after. Our first speaker up is Kevin Yost.
Kevin Yost, 1474 Middle Road, Town Penn. I'm not sure if this is on the agenda or not. The future of the former Good Shepherd campus.
Yes, we will be looking at that.
Button, please? Thank you.
You're good.
We'll be looking at proposals tonight.
Okay, should I wait till then?
Yes,
Sure.
thank you. Next up is Sheila Buck.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Tonight, just wanted to say thank you to all of our board members for all of your volunteer service. Thank you for all you do for the community and for the children of Rush-Henrietta. Have a good night.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no one else, that closes our public forum. We'll move into tonight's agenda. The first item are items of routine matters, items A through K. This consists of a treasury report, tax orders, tax payments, international trips, approval of CSE, CPSE recommendations, and approval for previous board meetings. I will accept a motion to approve the items of routine matter. Moved by Nikki, seconded by James. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? It is approved. Next is personnel actions. I will accept a motion by Diane, moved by Diane, seconded by Doug. Any discussion on personnel actions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Great, that is approved. And this brings us to our first workshop, and that is on Good Shepherd. I apologize.
The MOA.
Oh, the MOAs, I apologize. So I'd like a motion to accept regulations A and B under personnel. Moved by Diane, seconded by Doug. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? I apologize, that is passed. Now we are,
There's two of them, Jennifer.
Number
Which one
C.
do you want? There's B and C.
She did it together.
I did them together.
Yeah, all of them together.
Okay, perfect.
Apologize about that. So now we're all set for our workshop on Good Shepherd? Yeah, I'm so excited. I can't wait for this.
It's been a long time coming.
Oh, we need to, yes, we do, we did need that. Oh,
What's it counting down to? That's my question.
zero.
So as they're working with the technology here, I'll just give a little bit of background. As you know, we finally closed on the Good Shepherd property last June. Around the same time, I believe, we presented some very general concepts to the board about possibilities for the property, and have since spent the last 6 months working with our own internal team and along with our team from Labella to really refine those options and attach detail and cost to them as we were trying to conceptualize, how we might best utilize the Good Shepherd property. We really resisted the urge to sort of look at just the Good Shepherd site by itself, right? We wanted to really come up with a long-range vision for how we utilize that property and also our existing facilities and grounds at Sperry. So as you know, we opened a thought exchange in the weeks leading up to this presentation so that we could get some feedback from the community about how they'd like to see us utilize the site. We shared that information with you so that you could see what came out of that exchange. And really, you know, my three takeaways were most people were supportive of the purchase of that property. They see the benefit there. Almost everyone seemed to be supportive of us creating some sort of an access road, which would help to alleviate traffic before and after school and would provide better access, generally speaking, to the Sperry site, especially during events and athletic contests. So there was one more thing that everybody supported. Oh, the church. Most people felt like, and you know, we believe me, we were not knocking that church down, regardless. But everyone said, look, we want to see the church remain intact. We don't want to see that knocked down. And additionally, we want to see the district, you know, find a good use for the church. And you know, we toured that building as part of this process, and we do feel like that can be a beautiful space that will add value. And we're going to be talking more about that as the presentation goes on. But that came out loud and clear in the exchange as well. We also, as I said before, we tried to look at not just the Good Shepherd site, but also how to best utilize the Sperry site. And if you remember, over the summer, we were tasked with forming an advisory group of coaches. Tom Stewart was in charge of that, and they made some recommendations that we also incorporated into the presentation. So you don't have to make any decisions tonight, but we do just want your initial reactions and feedback based on what's being proposed. If we are going to put any proposition forward in May, we would have to know by the end of February what that's going to look like. But we're pleased to revisit the conversation now with more specificity. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy to talk us through some of the detail and introduce our team from Labella.
We have with us tonight a bunch of folks from Labella. Labella, as you know, is our architect firm, and they've been working very closely with us over the last four plus months to come up with different options. So we have Joe Curie from the team, and John, sorry, your last name?
Spur.
John Spur. And also we have Kevin Rodenmacher and Lindsay's here. So we have a number of folks from the Labella team. So what we're going to take you through tonight are four different options that were considered. The first one is to renovate the existing school building. There hasn't been any significant amount of money put into it in decades, so it does need refreshing. The second option is, we look at is what would the cost be if we raised the school building and use that site for athletics. We had talked about moving varsity baseball back to the Sperry campus. That would be a way to do that. The third option we looked at is raising the school building and constructing a new pre-K building. Because of the extensive amount of work needed to renovate, we looked at what would it take if we tore down and build new. And then the last option we looked at was demolishing the existing school building and putting up a new building for alternative programs from the high school, because we thought that would generate more state aid. Some of the things we learned during the process, that wasn't true. We went and talked to the folks from SED about what would be aidable. The good thing is, because the property abuts our high school site, they consider the site part of the high school. So any grounds work that we do will be aidable under the formula that the high school grounds work is aidable on. The disappointing piece was none of the building work will be qualified for state aidable. we pointed out that we have pre-K classes in there, and they said we purchased it even though we had, by their standards, enough classrooms to support elementary, including pre-K, because they use a higher student per classroom number than what our class size guidelines are. So they said incremental classrooms, they will not support any state aid for. And we asked, okay, how about the alternative program for the high school located there? And they said, no, they don't support any separate buildings for alternative programs. They feel they should be located in the main high school building. So that's, as you go through tonight, that's going to make some of the options more challenging, more expensive. However, each option will show you, we'll have it at minimum, because Bo talked about some of the things that really came out in thought exchange. The connector road is very popular, so every option will have the connector road. The improvements to the original church building. There was a lot of support to maintain and find useful uses for that building, so each option will contain that. And then the third thing that every option will contain is artificial turf on the Sperry Field. That continues the discussion from last year, where the board asked the athletics department to form a committee and look at different options, and they came back and did it. So that's going to be built into this. And then the final thing we'll give to you is phasing in. Because of the cost of some of these options, it probably, the board will want to consider phasing it in, looking at doing some in the short term and more later on down the road. So we'll give you an option, how can you phase it in and make it aidable so there's no impact to the taxpayers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joe and John to start the presentation.
Okay. I think Andy pretty much covered it all already, so I'm just kidding. My name is Joe Curry. I'm an architect at Labella, and
I'm John Spur. I'm a civil site engineer at Labella as well.
So we wanted to, before we get into it, just wanted to say thanks also to Bo and Andy, Ken Nelson and David Kay and Tom Stewart, who we worked with extensively over the last couple months. They were great collaborators. We had a lot of great ideas, a lot of good discussions, and through that, I think we were able to crystallize the options down into the 4 primary options that he mentioned already. We'll walk through each one of those, look at the associated costs. Andy will discuss some of the financial aspects in greater detail. John and I will focus more on the design and logistics. And of course, feel free to ask questions as we go along. This is meant to be as much of a discussion as a presentation. So let's see, I'm going to try aiming at one of these. Advance the slide. Or do I do that? Or?
I'll let you answer.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so does this, oh no, I don't want to do that, do I?
It goes up and down. I think it's a Mac, so.
Okay. I guess I'll use the laser pointer.
do this?
Well, I don't want to shine in anybody's eye. Yeah, I'll do this one over here. Okay. It's green,
All right.
It's not red. So anyway, just to kind of give you, it's kind of cut off at the bottom there. Overall orientation, north is up on the drawing here. Here's the Good Shepherd site. East Henrietta Road is off to the left here. Sperry High School would be sort of off the screen. Lehigh Station, again, above the drawing. And also on each of the drawings, we sort of show the graphics here for the plan, and then there's like a little box with some summarized financial information, and then we have an additional slide with more detailed financials that Andy will talk about. So with all the options, really the primary driver of the differences between them is what to do with the school building. As Andy already mentioned, there are some elements that are common to each of the options with maybe some minor variations. But the common elements include the renovations to the church building, the connector road, which goes from here. This is sort of the lower southwest corner of the Sperry lot, the west parking lot that this new road would connect through the site. And then some of the field work on the Sperry property, which we'll look at a little bit more later once we broaden our view out from beyond the Good Shepherd site. So, yeah, as I mentioned, as Amy mentioned, the first option is to renovate the existing school. It would be a complete gut renovation. It would include just about everything except for the main structure itself. We'd probably look at roof replacement, completely replacing the HVAC systems, fire alarms and life safety related things, plumbing, window replacement. Before we could do that, we'd have to kind of prepare a place for the kids to go, the programs that are currently occupying the building. So there would also be some work most likely at the Webster building, either in the current location of the alternative high school or where BOCES is. So step one would be to kind of move the kids out, then go in and do the renovation, and then move them back in once it would be done. In all the options, we looked at pretty similar effort at the church. We thought about what that could be best used for. It seems like one very good option would be to turn that into sort of a multi-purpose arts and community center. You could have, for example, smaller ensemble concerts, student art shows, plays, things like that. You could also open it up to community education classes or use it for staff training, things like that. It would need some interventions, though, to kind of bring it up to current standards, including things like elevators, or an elevator and better restroom facilities, ramps, things like that, to just kind of make it usable in a contemporary way. And John will talk about the site elements in just a second. Before I turn it over to him, this option, and we're projecting this into the future, the costs would be about $24 million for this site work, and then including also the work at Sperry. And the tax impact on that is about $54 per year for a typical household in the district.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the site-specific design here. So as everybody has mentioned, the main element here is the road, the first and foremost thing. We'd be looking at a two-way road from the southwest corner of Sperry parking lot over to East Henrietta Road, where we would be proposing a light, a traffic light that would have to be okayed by the DOT, since this is a state road. We have been in contact with the DOT to see if that is something that they would allow, and we provided them upfront with a trip generation analysis, and they came back to us and said that a traffic study would be required to determine some of the specifics regarding that light and turn lanes, and the more details of that design. But one thing that they might be really happy with is that we are proposing 2 entrances off of East Henrietta Road, whereas before there were 4 entrances, and DOT loves when you have as minimal entrances as possible going onto the site. So that would be a positive coming from DOT. Another thing on the site, you can see my cursor here. This is an existing federal wetland area that the road would have to cross over. So there would be some permitting involved in that. The Army Corps of Engineers would be involved in obtaining that permit. So we would go through those steps as soon as we were to proceed with this. But in addition there is an existing playground about in this area that we would have to relocate down over to the corner here. There would be also some relocation of the athletic pads here, and the fence line would also be pushed back slightly. Additionally, there is quite a bit of grade change on the site. Like if you look from about this point all the way down to here, it's close to 10 to 12 feet of grade change there. So until we get final survey, we've put a retaining wall in there just, you know, to budget for that allowance of fill that would be required. The site would then tie into the parking lot here. The parking lot would be get reworked. The existing parking lot is reworked. The space count under this concept would increase, but that varies throughout each concept. We do provide fire access and access to the dumpsters. We have a dumpster pad here, an allowance for that. And there is sidewalk connectivity that we're proposing from the parking lot over towards Sperry. And then the last part is the practice soccer field. This is, to note, this is a practice field only, and we're proposing to re-crown the field and improve the drainage there because of the known drainage problems that they've had in the past. So that basically sums up the site. So if anyone has any questions, please ask, but I'll turn it over to Andy now to go over the financials.
I just have a quick question. The cost for the moving the kids and having to do the work prior to that, is that included in?
That's built into it, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
So the next page is just a little bit more detail on the cost to try and portray how much is aidable. The total cost is $24 million, and some of these you can pick and choose. You could choose to delay the artificial turf. We have a $4 million price tag in there, so this isn't mandated, but these are different packages. But you could come up with your own packages if you want to see a different configuration. The connector road in this case would be a little over $2 million. The sports field that John talked about, currently it's not really used, so it would take a lot of work, but it would become a practice soccer field. It would not be a full-size soccer field, varsity soccer field, but it could be used for a practice field and for a lot of the town rec programs. The big cost is the $17.6 million to renovate the existing building, and that includes probably close to a couple of $1 million to move and renovate parts of Webster to accommodate the preschool, the age-appropriate facilities for the kids. And it also includes funding in there to renovate the old church, the original church building that we talked about. So in total, it's a $24 million price tag. And as I mentioned earlier, the aidable piece, that second column, really only the grounds work would be aidable. So you can see the big renovation cost, there's no aid on it. So our building aid would be about $3.9 million for this project. So the remaining money would have to be paid through the local taxpayers. So right now, we have about $10.5 million total in our capital reserve. So if we fully used our capital reserve to minimize the tax cost, we'd have to borrow $20 million, and that includes financing costs as well. And our typically borrowings are for 15 years, so the annual repayment, $1.36 million. That would be about a 1.8% tax rate increase. So this would most likely require a tax cap override to be able to do this. And as Joe mentioned, for a $150,000 house, that's about a $54 per year cost to the average taxpayer. The other thing, because you'll see, this will come into play on some of the other options not here, the lower left. Each building has what the state calls a maximum cost allowance, and that resets every 5 years. So at the high school, for the exterior work, right now it's $7.4 million. So we might do $10 million of qualified work, but they would only aid up to our ceiling. And that might be one of the reasons to phase some of this stuff in, because every 5 years that aid ceiling resets. So we want to maximize the aid for these projects.
Okay. Okay. So here's option 2. In some ways, probably the simplest of all the options. In this option, you can see underneath here where the Good Shepherd School is currently. That would get just abated and demolished with, again, the programs moving over to Webster, the universal pre-K. And we would replace it with a sort of a multi-purpose turf sports field. The church renovation, and this is basically the similar comments apply as from my last, from the option 1. Most of the design on this one is site related. Oh, I'm sorry, and this one is about $15 million. Again, including all the Sperry work, the work at Webster, with a tax impact of $25 per household per year.
Okay, so talking about the site stuff, again, the access road is very similar as compared to the first concept that we looked at. The DOT and Army Corps permitting would all still be required. One key difference here is the parking that we're showing in this zone here, showing that as a bus drop-off with some parking that buses for, away buses could potentially stage there, as well as, parents or staff can park their vehicles there. We are...
And we tried to show on the different options a few different little variations on the road. You could probably pick, that there's nothing unique about this option, which means we could only do that bus drop-off for this one. That could also be used on option 1 or any of the other
Exactly,
options.
yes. As well as this perimeter parking here, that could also be interchanged on any of the options. On this one, the existing parking lot for Good Shepherd would be demolished, and we would show a new parking lot here to fit the needs of the turf multi-purpose field. But we would maintain the sidewalk connectivity from this parking lot all the way over to the Sperry Fields, the same we did in the first one. So talking about the athletic field now, this option includes a multi-purpose artificial turf field that would be baseball and soccer, and would also have the ability for lacrosse as well. These are competition level fields. Interesting to note, because the first one was just practice, this is competition. This also includes dugouts, batting cages, and perimeter fencing around the multi-purpose field. And for those of you who've been over to East Ridge High School, this layout mimics East Irondequoit's East Ridge High School very similarly, and that's been an award-winning project, and it's received very much accolades in the community, so we tried to mimic that as best we could.
Tom Stewart and the coaches really liked it. They played there. They really liked it.
And the other reason for considering turf in that area is because of the drainage issues there. So we kind of went back and forth between looking at a grass field versus turf, but that's one of the considerations is the drainage in that area.
Yep. This option also proposes a concession building behind the turf field there, and an area denoted for stormwater management. as well, because there will be some stormwater management required through DEC for this option. So that pretty much wraps up the site. Anybody have any questions?
Did you eliminate one more road cut?
Yeah, look, there's only one egress
Yes.
entry point on Eastern
Yes,
Avenue.
yes, that would just be one.
One thing to mention here, though, is we currently have tennis, varsity tennis and varsity baseball off-site. So one of the goals here was to bring back varsity tennis, well, potentially in another phase, and varsity baseball back to the students. That's one of the things we're seeing.
Question, is this plan, I see the concession stand, is there restroom facilities?
It would be, combined.
Combined,
Concessions and restrooms, yeah.
Okay.
Did you say it's like East Ridge, or are you saying it's gonna be raised then, that whole field and turf right there? Because it's feet above ground level for their baseball. They actually go down into the ground for playouts. Or is that not?
We didn't really get into that.
The elevation there is higher anyway, right? Because wetland on the right side, so that's elevated naturally. Right?
This,
Yeah, there's
this,
a berm there, right?
this is a low point.
Right.
Right.
So going to the left.
It starts to
Yeah.
elevate,
it's about
correct.
8 feet. You said he made a comment earlier.
Yeah,
It's going up.
exactly, yeah.
8 to 10 feet above that, which is part of the drainage, which is helping to support that view.
Correct.
I think that's what she was doing.
Would there be an outfield fence?
Now, was there an outfield fence with this one?
Yes, there is.
Would you removable? That or?
Is it a removable fence or is it
It's permanent fence.
permanent?
Okay.
Any other questions?
Could maybe there'd be a softball field instead, and then the softball field in the high school, become a baseball field, and then if it was a softball field like the Good Shepherd property, we would have a removal off from the fence.
We'll actually, when we look at the broader, the question was about whether it should be a softball field versus a baseball field. When we look at the broader site, which includes the Sperry property, we kind of attempted to address sort of the entire campus and all the sports needs as a whole. So I think if you wait till we get to that point, it'll explain a little bit what we were looking at.
So for the cost for this one, 1, 2, and 4 are similar throughout the options, and they're all aidable because the grounds work. A little bit of the school building demolition may be aidable as part of the grounds work. So we estimate about $2 million. However, that would, all those parts would have us exceed our maximum aid allowance. So you can see by $1.4 million. So the most building aid we would generate is the $4.6 million, the $4,662,000. So that means the local cost is $11,052,000. We do have $10.5 million of capital reserves, which so we'd have to borrow. And the thing with the borrowing, we're borrowing more than the total cost on the left because you have to add in the financing cost and the cost for processing the borrowing. So that puts the total up over $15.7 million. So we have to borrow almost $8 million in this option, which is about a 0.8% tax rate increase or $25 on a $150,000 house.
And I have a question. Does this assume that there's room at the Webster Building, or we would be?
Well, then that's going to cause decisions.
Okay.
One is, I mean, there's a couple of different options. I don't know, we want to get into those tonight or not, but yeah, we have to look at different options for the Webster building, how to do it. Because as you know, the BOCES lease is out in August of 2022. So it'll give us various options to look at there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so the third option replaces the existing Good Shepherd School with a brand-new pre-K, universal pre-K and daycare building. And again, a sports field similar to the one we looked at on option 2. So one of the nice things about this version is that there's no sort of interim move of the students. You could build the new universal pre-K building while this existing school is still occupied. And once the new building is complete, the kids could move over into the new facility. It's just outside, it's being built just outside the footprint of the existing school. And so one of the advantages of this one is that there is no required work at the Webster building. The new building, basically, it sort of recreates the functions and spaces of the existing school, but with the advantage of being brand new facilities. So there's still like a daycare wing, a UPK wing, gymnasium, library, offices, everything that is currently making the Good Shepherd a successful building. There would also be like a small corner of the building could be also used for concessions for the field. And one of the other nice things about this one is that it ties the new school into the church building. So not only could you use that for the other uses I mentioned before, sort of district-wide performances or community meetings, whatever. But during the day, it could also be another indoor space for the kids in the program, to be active or just give them a change of scene. And it would really, make that integrate it right into the new building. The cost for this option is $29 million, which again includes all the Sperry site work, with a tax impact of about $78 per year for a typical house.
Okay, so to summarize the site work, the access road again is the same as it was in the previous two concepts. The parking layouts that we are showing are still interchangeable. As you can see, we removed the bus drop-off option here and maintained the athletic pad. So there's some flexibility in what's wanted there. We maintained the sidewalk connectivity from the new parking lot all the way over to Sperry, like the other concepts. And for this one, we are still proposing to reduce the curb cuts at East Henrietta down to 2. The athletic field layout is the same as the previous concepts. It's multi-purpose turf. It's a similar layout to East Irondequoit, East Ridge, and let's see. So the differences here is just the connectivity to the proposed school. The parking lot is slightly different in this area just to fit the layout of the new school. And we have added fire access coverage all the way around the building to meet those codes, as well as delivery areas and a landscape buffer to buffer those residents to the south.
And the other thing, where the lower egress is, that's currently where the parish offices are. So we would probably propose in any option to demolish the parish offices and probably also the old farmhouse that's there. Both of those would need significant amounts of investment, and there's really no practical use for a school district use for them. So that we would suggest raising both of those buildings.
Questions?
So the financials here, $29 million total cost of the project. The biggest piece of it, like as in the others, is raising and building the new building, but it's only a couple $1 million more. And the beauty of it, the current air circulation at the current Good Shepherd building, it was designed so it goes underneath the building. There's a crawl space and it's just a dirt floor, and that's why at certain times you get a musty smell. With the new building, that would be designed out. You have a lot fresher air as well as everything would be new, and you could design it to the specific uses that you are using it for. So this option was very attractive, given that it's only a few $1 million more than reconstructing, but it's still a very expensive option. So that's why at the end we'll talk about phasing things in. Here again, we would max out our building aid under the maximum cost allowance, and this is where we might propose the sports field. That's something you could delay, and so because we're exceeding the maximum cost allowance, the sports field where the current church is, that's something that we might consider delaying until the allowance resets, so we maximize our aid. But in total, here again, we fully utilize our $10.5 million capital reserve. We'd have to borrow about $28 million. It would add $1.9 million per year to the budget to service the debt service. So that's a 2.6% tax rate increase just for this project, which is $78 per year on $150,000 houses.
And really the practicality of waiting to do the sports field on this one, because you've got to build the new one before you can take the old one down, so it makes total sense.
That's
to
right,
pick
yeah,
that.
exactly. So, yeah, you're right, by its very nature. It'll be,
Okay. Okay, and here's option 4, the final option that we looked at. In this version, again, we're demoing the Good Shepherd School, moving that program over to Webster. And on this one, we're constructing a new facility for the alternative high school. So, it makes sense that we would build this first, move the kids from Webster here, then do some renovations to Webster to allow it to accommodate the daycare program, and then move the UPK kids and daycare over to Webster. So this is probably also the most logistically complex of the 4 options. As far as the building goes, again, it sort of recreates the spaces and facilities that you have at Webster for the alternative high school. It is a little more efficient in how you use the site. It's a little bit of a smaller footprint, although the two, the pre-K building and this building are about the same square footage and floor area. This one has a smaller footprint because we would have a 2-story classroom wing over here. So it allows you to use a little bit more of the site for parking or other parts of the design. A lot of the same advantages. You'd be getting new facilities. You could tie it into the church building. I talked about the phasing already, and this one would be about $34.4 million, including all the work, and with a tax impact of about $100 a year for a typical house in the district.
So in this one, as you can see, the road is the same. The bus drop-off here is slightly different than the previous ones that we were showing, but again, that can be mixed in as desired. Still showing 2 curb cuts at East Henrietta Road. This curb cut was pushed slightly southward. The DOT might like that a little bit better because the entrances are separated a little bit more. if so, it's very minute, but the parking in this option, as Joe alluded to, is much larger, and it would include a drop-off for vehicles in the front as well as an open plaza space at the entrance. The athletic field is still a multi-purpose field, the same as what we were proposing in the previous two options. Artificial turf, both competition, and this feature, or this option, also provides fire access and dumpster access to the north side.
Is there a concession area for this model?
Yeah, I think we also, it's pretty small. I think we've got an area right in here where, again, something that would serve, restrooms and have the option for concessions.
And quite frankly, the only reason we considered this project, we knew it'd be a struggle to get a pre-K building aidable. We thought an alternative high school building would be aidable, but unfortunately, when we got up to the state and walked through it, they said no, they would not consider it.
What drives I know you may have touched on this, but just refresh. What drives the cost difference between a new alt high school and a new pre-K building? It's about $5.5 million.
So part of it is the work there'd have to be work done at Webster in this version, whereas the pre-K, you kind of skip all that. So that's part of it. Part of it is I think that we just really assigned like a slightly higher per square foot cost to a high school building. Just they're going to be science labs.
There would be 2 floors to this, or
parts of it? Yeah, there's like a two-story wing over here. Okay.
So this is the most expensive option. It would result in a 3.3% tax rate increase, pretty significant, which would be about $100 per year increase, and that's for the 15 years of the financing for the project on this option. So all of these, because of the tax impact, we came up with ways, or is there a way to phase some of this in? And so the last option takes bits and pieces of what you've seen to see, okay, what can we do now with no tax rate increase?
So yeah, as Andy and Bo have mentioned, in looking at this, we felt like it made sense to sort of take, look at what we might consider as a first step, which would allow you to address some of the things that the community was interested in addressing, like traffic issues at Sperry, other stuff, while still giving you the flexibility to be able to make decisions about the site even after this sort of first step is designed and constructed. So really the items that are in this, what we called phase 1, it's the renovations to the church, it's the connector road, and then it's some field work at Sperry, which John will talk about in a moment. But all of this can be done independently of even a decision being made about what you want to do with the remainder of the Good Shepherd property. What we're seeing here on this, the screen, the field work, the road, and the church renovation is would be about $8.5 million. This would have no tax impact to start, and then it would have no tax impact. This would be, the costs for this are already included in all those other options you saw. So it's not 8.5 plus the other costs. This is sort of taking a portion of those other options and just doing it as a first step. And we have sort of a enlarged view of the Sperry site here as well, which John, you can talk about.
How many years are we looking at? This was going to be implemented? start to finish? Estimate?
I'll let
But that,
our experts.
it does, I mean, it depends, obviously, on, I think, which of the options you choose. The first phase that we're thinking of could actually probably be, or we were thinking initially it could even be summer 2021 that it's constructed. So you could design and build this before even, and then I guess that would allow the MCA to reaccumulate as you talked about.
Yeah. And that would be contingent right of this May. So if we put this option up in May, that the field work, they could get a good portion of it done in summer of 2021. It takes about a year to go through the process to design and get SED approval. So some of this, and you never know what the wait time is at SED, but it's very possible a lot of this work would be done in summer of 21 and the remainder finished up in summer of 22.
Did I understand you correctly? You're talking just work to the church itself, but not the school portion on this?
In this option, right.
Correct.
Right, yes, it does, the original church, it upgrades that, but it does not touch the school building that we're using now.
So it will be the access road, the church renovation, and then site work at Sperry, which we would be talking about to start.
And John will explain the field work at Sperry. This is the $4 million number that you saw in all the options. This is what you'll get for it.
Yep. Okay, so to summarize the site work, in talking to the athletic director, one of the main issues has been inability to use the grass fields early in the spring. So in placing a turf multi-purpose field at S4, that could solve the issue and allow teams to get on the field sooner, as well as gym classes to use that field as well. It's right next to the gym in Sperry High School, so it would be very easy to access during those periods. The field is a north-south orientation, which is the ideal orientation, and the athletic director was very happy about that. Again, this multi-purpose layout, and we'd be proposing a grandstand and a press box in this location. We'd also be proposing ball netting here, which would basically just trap any loose soccer balls or lacrosse balls. A scoreboard in this location, and then goal posts for football. This option would require the relocation of the existing tennis courts to the north, as you can see right here. We'd be maintaining the same number of courts as they are in need of replacement now. And also the north-south orientation of the courts is ideal, so we maintain that. And we also have added a sidewalk feature between the courts that would allow spectators to look at or watch the games. I don't believe there's much of an opportunity for spectators now. And also it'll give the campus kind of a welcome feel as you're going into the parking lot. It'll give it kind of that new and welcoming feel. Additionally, so in moving the tennis courts to this location, that conflicts with the softball location, so we propose the softball location to be down near the rest of the baseball and softball areas to give it that central location. And then some other features, we're proposing the relocation of the batting cages down here, and the extension of the gravel path all the way over to provide access, and bleacher pads as well for spectators. I also will add that since S4 received a press box and grandstand, we're proposing the same for S9.
Because really, the original concept that the study group that Tom Stewart had came up with They wanted the artificial turf really where S8 is, perpendicular to S9, so they could share a press box between the existing soccer field and there, but it could not be fit in without encroaching on the baseball to the south, and so they thought this was a good option as long as we did provide a press box and stands, both at the soccer field and at the artificial turf. They'll be smaller than the stands at the football field, in a smaller press box, but it should accommodate the typical crowds that we get. And really, S4 would probably become the varsity lacrosse where they play games, as well as practice for football and practice for soccer.
And this doesn't include bringing any varsity baseball fields to?
No, this is the $4 million in each option, which is just on the existing old Spirit Center that we would do there. Right, it does not touch anything on the Wood Shepherd site.
And that softball field, grass, turf?
Grass, that would be
Grass.
real grass, not artificial
Well, that was my assumption with the dollar cost, so.
turf. Yeah, just one turf field here, and then ultimately, depending what happens with the Good Shepherd site, we did a second artificial turf.
Right.
Any questions on this? This sort of addresses the lingering question from last year, what could we do that we could afford for artificial turf at Spirit?
Well, I appreciate the comprehensive look at the athletic situation, so we're not just throwing money down the wrong road. So this is really a great look at things.
Does anyone else have any questions? Mr. Yost, did we answer your question, sir?
Yes, I had a few comments. There's, all of them have some advantages and disadvantages. The last three options have the advantages of the diamond and with the rectangular sports field at Good Shepherd and the artificial turf there. And this one has the advantage of renovations of the field on the high school property. Of course, the access road is the same in all four, and in all four, it would displace the playground, which hasn't been there that long, and I really sort of like to see that playground preserved, even if it is moved on the Good Shepherd campus. Although if a preschool were to be moved to Webster, likely the playground should move there with it. I'm not sure I like the idea of connecting a new building with the historic church. It would take away the preservation of the church. I don't like the idea of demolishing the old farmhouse. In phase one, perhaps the farmhouse and the parish office would be sold, and the parish office could be a chiropractor's office, a dentist's office, a doctor's office, an engineer's office, and probably the current and any of the four options of the old convent site and the current two-way driveway along the north side of the church to be sold as two parcels, either two businesses or two residences, and the trellis at the old convent site would be part of that as well. And it's probably too expensive to move the parish office or the farmhouse, either of those two sites. And then in either option, the old chapel and its connecting narthex and stairways and confessionals and restrooms are useless, and they may as well be demolished in any of the options.
We've got a lot of nice options to look at, so we'll be considering all of them. Thank you. Thank you very
Okay.
much, gentlemen.
Oh, Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So ultimately, like I said, you don't need to make a decision tonight, but this is just to get you thinking about which options you feel would be best for the district. And like I said, we recommend a phased approach because we will be able to essentially include those components which the community said that they valued, but with essentially no impact to taxpayers.
Well, yeah, the phasing, we have the 10.5 million we talked about, so the last part of the phasing would all be funded through the reserve. So actually, the sustainability part of it will generate some cash flow to replenish the reserve over time. There's no impact to taxpayers.
Question?
Yeah, I just have a question. So there's 4 different options, it looks like, right? And who decides, do you as a board decide which option that you go with, and then taxpayers would vote on it? That's how it works, sorry.
It's all right.
Okay, thanks.
And Andy? Our capital reserve fund, that's all we have right now.
Correct.
But when we spend that, we're already generating, we're currently generating on some of our projects anyway, state aid to keep
Correct, so
replenishing.
we're replenishing at about $3 million a year.
Okay. I just worry about being empty and then
As
a
to-
boiler
as
goes
our
or
facilities
something, you
crew.
know? And then Kent's gonna be coming to us.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. And that brings us to our second workshop of the evening, our Instructional Space Committee.
Karen's gonna help me set up the PowerPoint. Okay. Keeping with the use of space theme. Just to preface this report, I want to acknowledge and thank the members of the Instructional Space Committee. We have representatives from each building, mostly parents, who volunteer their time in the fall to meet with us and do an excellent job. I also want to acknowledge Karen Milburn, our Director of Information Systems, for the phenomenal job she does each and every year with crunching those numbers and making the projections and validating and verifying our enrollments and so forth. So a lot of work and certainly big shoes to fill. So we're very happy that we have overlap time between her and the new director coming in so they can learn. Are we good, Karen? So that's all right. I'll start without the slides. So each year the committee is charged by the Board of Education to accomplish a few simple tasks. One is to examine historical enrollment trends and data and examine where we've been and identify some of those trends and how they impact the current situation. Also, we then move into sort of looking at the future. We take a look at our current enrollments from Beds Day in October and examine any increases, decreases, where we've gained students, how different grade levels look compared with historical data. And then from there, Karen leads us into the discussion of looking at what our projections are for the next 5 years. As you know, we don't go out beyond 5 years because once you get out past that point, it really is, as scientific as the methodology is, it really becomes like more of a guessing game because there's so many variables with a school district, with folks moving in and moving out and building projects and so forth. We also look at our town development information. I meet with each of the town planners and talk about what's being currently built in the towns and what is going to be planned on the horizon for the next 3 to 5 years as best as they can predict. project. We've also started meeting with folks in the real estate business to take a look at their perspective on existing housing and how that turnover is going and what trends might be emerging there. And from all that information, we assess what the district's current and future space needs are and whether we have the space to meet those needs. And if not, if we don't have that space or there's other issues with projected space, then we make recommendations to the Board of Education for you to consider. So as you read the report, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I did want to highlight a couple of major findings of the committee. Overall, they determined that our space planning in the district continues to be sound and no major changes are on the horizon. We did note again this fall for the second straight year an enrollment increase at elementary. Karen actually had projected that elementary would increase. In fact, I think she was within 2 students in terms of her numbers. But that is 2 years in a row, and actually over the last 5 years, if you notice on page 1, over the last 5 years, district overall enrollment has increased by 160 students. So the trend over the last 20 years has just been sort of this steady decline, as you're seeing in most of the districts in Monroe County. But now, within the last 5 years, we've had a little bit of a bump. So we are definitely keeping an eye on that, especially at the elementary level where we have the board's class size guidelines to respect in terms of our staffing and space planning. So one of the other trends that's definitely part of the report is the continued imbalance in growth, especially in the town of Henrietta. Henrietta is our big driver, obviously, for enrollment, and there still remains a pretty good imbalance in terms of the western part of the district. The Berger feeder pattern is growing at a much faster rate than the Roth feeder pattern, and so that has an impact on enrollments. It has an impact on space, obviously, and it has an impact on potential decisions that the board may have to consider. Along that line, one of the major concerns that emerged from the report, and certainly is discussed in the recommendations section, is the projection that within this next 5-year window of time, we're projecting that Vollmer Elementary School, Vollmer Elementary School may run out of classroom space, and that's something that we deal with in the report, and I'll talk about in just a moment. As we get to the recommendations, and I think it would be helpful to have the slide for that. So in terms of the recommendations in the report, and you can find those on page 8, I believe. The real concern, as I said, is Vollmer. There is also space pressure on Berger as well, because obviously Vollmer feeds Berger. And Berger is growing very rapidly, but it's more acute at Vollmer because of the elementary space class size guidelines and the available classrooms at Vollmer. If you look in the report on page 4, there is a chart showing you projected room space based on our 5-year projections, and we are projecting that from the school years 2022 to 2025, for those 3 years, under the current configuration, current attendance areas, current class size guidelines, that Vollmer would be short 2 classrooms. There's a variety of ways to deal with that. The committee had a lot of discussion around this and came up with some recommendations that are in the report. And the first one that they asked you to consider would be you could redraw attendance areas. That is something that we did during the reconfiguration, so it's within the last 5 years. Certainly at that time, I don't think the board was anticipating having to do that again for a while, because that is not something that is a politically popular decision at times. One of the things that the committee asked you to consider was to, instead of revising all the elementary attendance areas, so for example for the 4 primary schools, to start the change at 4th grade. Because really, when we look at, and you can see from the report, when you look at the space in the primary schools and their projected enrollments, and even some of the enrollment growth we expect at Leary and Winslow over the next several years, they have the space. They have more than enough space to accommodate that. Vollmer, on the other hand, as I said, looks like it may be squeezed. So you could take the option of looking at attendance areas in grades 4 through 9. Now, if that's something the board decides down the road that they want to look like, we could certainly do a more in-depth study session around that. What we did though, just for your information, so you have something to kind of look at and mull over, we did include in the packet attachments that show you, Karen did a breakdown of the whole district and every single attendance area, and you'll see little numbers in there that show the number of students currently enrolled in those particular areas. Because the committee did, and Nikki was on the committee, feel free to chime in, Nikki, if you want. The committee did take a look at our last meeting at some potential ideas of if we shifted these 3 areas from Sherman to Vollmer, or from Vollmer to Sherman, you could potentially solve this issue in terms of the space. Because one of the considerations will be that the committee mentions in the recommendations is trying to affect as few families and as few neighborhoods, as few students as possible. So that's one recommendation. Another recommendation they thought might be worth considering would be to, that would save some space at Vollmer, would be to take the life skills, the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade life skills program out of Vollmer and consolidate that in one of the primary schools where there is space available. That would free up 2 classrooms at Vollmer, which would solve the problem. There's a downside to that in terms of displacing those students because the families and the students are used to being a part of one school community. But one option, for example, would be to move the 4th through 6th grade life skills to Leary, where the K-3 life skills is already housed. So actually the students, as they age up, would actually not even have a transition. They would just remain at Leary in a K-6 life skills program. At least for the time being while this space crunch exists at Vollmer, because projecting, looking out, and again, it's tough to look out past 5 years, but based on the data we have and the building, what we anticipate in terms of home building and so forth, that bubble is likely to level off after this 2025 timeframe. So that's one thing to consider. File would be another option if you wanted to move the whole life skills program to File. They do have the space to do that, and it would again, keep it in the same general area of the district, the western part of the district. Another idea is to, again, just take a closer look at some of the way space is being used at Sherman, Vollmer, and Berger. Sherman's not going to run out of space, but they're getting a little bit tighter in the next few years. If you look at the numbers, their numbers are increasing, just not as fast as Vollmer, to free up some rooms. We did a pretty comprehensive audit in the fall of 2018 to look at all 6 elementary schools and how they use various spaces. And we have, various spaces that are used as conference rooms and coaches' offices that are classrooms. Some of the related services, the board set aside 3 rooms in each building for that. There's and buildings in general, because they have enough space, have gone beyond three rooms in each school, so you might want to consolidate reading and ESL and some of those things. Just some options to look at to get you through the crunch. There was discussion about class sizes, but the Space Committee really has no purview over class size or programs or any recommendations like that, so you won't see any recommendations in this report regarding those types of policies. That's really outside the purview of the Space Committee. And then the last bullet, which is really a carryover from past years, but to continue to work with the town, continue to work with realtors and others to get a handle on where we can expect growth in the future. One of the trends that's embedded in the discussion of the elementary schools in the report is that we are seeing some turnover in some of our older housing stock, especially in this area, the Winslow and a little bit of Crane area, where a lot of our empty nesters are aging out. A lot of the new houses being built actually aren't single-family large homes. They're actually patio homes and townhomes and duplexes and things like that that are geared toward that 55 and over demographic. So as those folks exit their homes, they're turning over to the millennials, who are, of course, starting families and having children and giving us all job security by sending kids to our schools. So we are seeing that trend. So that's something definitely to keep an eye on, and that's why we want to continue those consultations so we can stay on top of that. And you'll notice again in the packet that we included our development charts for Rush, Brighton, and Henrietta, so you can kind of see where the homes are being built, what's anticipated in the next 3 or 4 years or so. The good news this year from a growth standpoint is that we pretty much expect the rate of growth to remain the same over the next 3 or 4 years. There's no additional big single-family housing projects on the horizon that would generate 100 or 120 families like Queens Park, for example. So, and those, Queens Park, Fox Run, some of the big ones are in the process of being built out, so. That's really it. Any questions or comments?
Sheila?
I understand, I guess mine is a question. Despite the fact that Leary has significantly more students than other primary schools, you're not considering it an issue because the building itself is larger?
Yes.
They're able to house them even though they have significantly more students?
Yes, I mean, they do have a larger population than the Crane or File. Winslow is almost as large as Leary right now. And what we're projecting over the next 5 years, Leary's going to grow, but it's not going to grow to the point where it's so much bigger than the rest. Nothing like the situation we had before reconfiguration.
Busing.
Yes.
I'm sure there's a lot of discussion about busing around. Thinking in the future, having the kids, remapping this a bit, do you think there'd be less time sitting in the buses? Or would that be something to consider?
That's something obviously that would have to be studied in any decision-making around this, because obviously if you redraw attendance areas, you're impacting transportation, so that's going to be.
There's a cost factor to that too,
Yeah.
right? So there
Yeah.
could be if the study shows that you can decrease their time and the buses aren't making these multiple routes and there's shortage of bus drivers, that would be beneficial to everybody as well.
It could be. It very well could be. And the committee actually, the areas, the struggle with our district, and we went through this during the reconfiguration, is that all the growth is on the fringes of the district. It's on the outside. And where we need to be able to switch attendance areas from schools to school, if the board elects to do that, is in the middle. So they tried to identify a few areas along, sort of almost like if you look at the West Henrietta and 390 corridor, to try to see where we might get some bang for our buck, because some of those attendance areas in there, there's hardly any families at all or neighborhoods because it's industrial. But there are a few in there, and if the board gets to that point where they want to do a study session, we would do that. We would consider all those factors, like where would you get the biggest bang for your buck? How's it going to affect transportation, so you're not, crossing, kids aren't passing Roth to get to Berger, that type of thing.
Thank you.
Question in the back?
The revision of the attendance areas for 49, does that affect the K-3 school as well, or will kids start in K-3 and then flip-flop over to a different 4-9?
The current K, under that recommendation, the current K-3 attendance areas would remain the same. We would just adjust the 4-9
So
attendance.
they flop to a completely different school?
It depends what
If
areas.
they're in that, if they're in one of the.
It depends what areas they're chosen. They might currently be assigned to Balmer, and they might end up going to Sherman.
But they would start maybe at the same elementary school and then flip-flop?
Correct,
Yes.
if the K-3 areas are left the same.
How does that, I don't really know how all this works, how does that work when you guys come up to some of these options and deciding on what happens, what are these choices you make?
That's the board's
Just the
prerogative.
board's decision.
That's the board's prerogative.
For those of you that have been on budget advisory, we talked about how roundabout year 3 of that 5-year projection, some difficult decisions are going to have to be made around finances, class size, and space utilization, and this certainly factors into that conversation.
So if we decide to move the life skill program from 4 to 6 to Leary, so the whole school would be just life skills program, or how you accommodate the kids who are transitioning, instead of moving to a new school, staying there? Are you planning to, because Leary has life skill classes now and regular ed classes.
Oh,
would be,
Right, no, this would just be two classrooms that are currently used for life skills, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade at Vollmer would move to either Leary or File or wherever the board decides.
And this kids who are Leary just transition to the 4 and 6 if we decide to go to Leary.
The students in the life skills program would just stay, right, if it's Leary, they would stay at Leary. If it's File, they would go to File, like right now they're going to Vollmer.
So the life skills kiddos would stay in those buildings. The K through 3 building, they would be in through 6th grade within the
Correct.
life skills program.
Correct, right, that's self-contained program.
And that gains us,
Two classrooms.
gains us 2 classrooms
At Vollmer.
at Vollmer, which is what we need to alleviate the problem as it
Correct.
currently stands.
Any more questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is a trifecta this evening, our third workshop. Baseball terms, James.
No, it's not. Trifecta.
Horse racing.
It's a horse racing term.
Okay, a sports analogy. Work with me.
Don't ask me how
like-
I know that.
I'm under medicine.
I've heard. I've been told.
Next, we are looking at district accountability status.
Yes, so typically, I'll come to you in the fall with the school report card data and kind of give you an overview of the state accountability data. The state was late this year, again, with the accountability data. We actually got it right before the holidays, so that's why the report's taking place now. So what I thought I'd do, if you think back to last year was the first year of implementation of the state's new ESSA implementation plan under the new revised federal education law. So I went into quite a bit of depth as to how that changed the way we're measured. I want to just quickly review some of those again, because again, the terminology is different. It used to be annual, yearly progress, and we had different types of measures. One of the things to keep in mind now is there are way more measures. We're measured on every single criteria for every single subgroup. So there's literally hundreds of measures. And there's a lot of math and a lot of comparison of baseline data to performance and growth and so forth embedded in this. So the overview is basically the state gives you one of just a few designations. Districts are either districts in good standing or they are target districts, which means there's at least one school in the district that potentially could be in an improvement situation. For schools, again, they're either good standing, they can be in good standing, and within good standing, schools can be designated, a certain percentage every year are going to be designated as recognition schools. As you recall, our senior high school got that designation last year. That replaces the old reward school, which our senior high school achieved in 2017 and 2018. So we've got a 3-year streak going. We'll see what happens this year. If you're not in good standing, you're either one of two things as a school. You're either a TSI or targeted school, and support and improvement school, or you're a comprehensive support and improvement or CSI school. And I'll explain what those designations are. That replaces all the old designations such as school under review, school in need of improvement. There are all kinds of acronyms and so forth. The TSI is the one we need to talk about because we do have a situation in the district where this could be a possibility for us next year. It's based on the performance of subgroups. It's determined annually, and all of these measures, and we'll get into what the measures are in just a moment, all of the measures are rated on a scale of 1 through 4, similar to some of the state assessments, 1 being the lowest, 4 being the highest. And what they do with those things is once they've done all their calculations and growth measures and measured you against the standard and what levels you're supposed to be achieving, they rank schools like schools, and that's how they come up with that 1, 2, 3, or 4. The trigger for TSI becomes a level 1 and a combination of level 1 over a number of measures with subgroups. The ones that are most heavily weighted are growth, where they look at student growth in ELA and math. ELA or math or a combination of ELA and math. Once you hit a 1 in that area, if you have a combination of 1s in some other areas, you have a chance of being on the TSI designation. If a school is TSI, they must develop a comprehensive education plan for the state that identifies the specific improvement plans there and performance improvement targets that are going to be worked toward. They have to have annual surveys of students and parents and staff, and potentially they can receive targeted Title I funds depending on if they're a Title I school or not. The year before, it's a 2-year process, so the year before you're actually designated as TSI, you would be designated as a potential TSI school or a potential target school, and we're going to get into that a little bit in a moment. The second level of state oversight comes with the CSI. That's sort of more intense, comprehensive support and improvement, not to be confused with NCIS. How much longer we can use that joke, because CSI, I don't think it's on anymore. But the CSI is based on 3 years of data, and it's based on all students, performance of all students, as well as your subgroups. So there's a lot of different triggers for that, but it must be after 3 years of data, so it is harder to receive this designation. And you can see that multiple level 1 performance will trigger that. A graduation rate below 67% will trigger that. In that case, that's when the state comes in and does state sanctions. They impose a comprehensive education plan. They can make transfers. They can do a lot of different things. You don't want to get into that area. Now, one thing about the designation of a target district, if any one school in the district is a potential TSI school or becomes a TSI school, then the district is a target district, okay? Or a potential target district. So again, as it's been all along during NCLB and now under ESSA, there's really 2 areas. There's 2 sort of umbrella areas where they make these designations. One is the elementary and middle level, and the other is the high school level. And they define elementary and middle as grades 3 through 8, and high school as grades 9 through 12. So it doesn't quite align with our current grade configuration, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. At the elementary and middle level, they look at academic progress for each subgroup and overall relative to our performance targets, which are called MIPS. We talked a little bit about that last year. That's a target that they set based on past performance and anticipated growth based on our students' profiles. And that's compared to students, similar students all across New York State. So it's not just a snapshot of their achievement or test scores in any one year. It's a broad measure of not only their achievement, but their growth as measured against similar schools and students. They look at student growth. As I said, that's weighted very heavily. They look at where the students were last year and where they should be projected to be the next year and what happened as a result of what happened in that school. And that's where your growth measure comes from. There's a composite indicator that combines ELA and math and also throws in science. In this case, it's the Science 8 and Science 4 exams. For Rush-Henrietta, instead of Science 8, it's Earth Science, because we give Earth Science at 8th grade. English language proficiency is another area that is looked at, where you have to meet targets. Chronic absenteeism, we talked a little bit about this last year because we had a couple subgroups around the district where that was low. That's the percent of students absent 10% or more of the school year. That is a trigger for potential state sanction. And beginning next academic year, so we'll be talking about this 2 years from now, they're going to add school suspension data to this as well as a measure. So, any question about the measures?
How about the in-school suspension?
That's counted in the suspension rate, right, Nerlon? Isn't that reported? Is it 2 different things? Okay, so I'm not sure what they're going to count as far as that measure. Is it just out of school? Yeah, so. Is there another question?
When they measure the growth rate, have they shared the formula for how they're going to determine that growth rate?
Yes. It's very.
It's an actual quantifiable formula that somebody could like.
It's very complex.
Music teacher could do it?
Yeah, you could do it. It would take a while to study it. Yeah. I've sat with Karen Milburn for a couple hours. Dean and I sat with her last week, and we didn't even get into that level of complexity. It's very complex.
And is there any, I mean, this is not really a question for you necessarily, but I just raise it as a question for in general, that of course words, when they tried to create a growth rate for teachers based on exams, it turned out to be, I guess the best way to say it is not meaningful, at least by a court of law, because the state couldn't produce that in a court of law, what that formula was. So that's why I'm asking, does the formula really exist that anybody could figure out?
To our knowledge, yes, it does. Yep.
Does the peer group factor into that calculation though?
Absolutely.
Is that complicated?
The thing that about this is that you're being compared apples to apples. So all the comparisons, whether it's growth, achievement, composite performance, attendance, absenteeism, any of these things, it's based on like students around the state. So if you get a 1, it's because your school or your grade level or your subgroup, whatever it is, ranked in the bottom quartile essentially. Although it's actually less than the quartile. Karen said it's less than 25%, but it is a ranking. So you are being ranked against like schools. Can we wait to the end of the presentation for questions?
We'll just wait.
Yeah. So what is, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped this. At the high school level, what do they look at? Again, they look at composite performance, student achievement, ELA, math, science, and social studies, and that's based on the Regents exams. They look at academic progress. Again, they take your baseline data, which was 2017 and 18, and they look at what value has been added. How did kids progress? How did kids grow versus their predicted or what you would expect them to grow in that amount of time against like students. So again, if you have a high socioeconomic need student population, you're being compared against other schools with that same need. If you have a high E&L population, you're being compared with schools like schools with the same profile. They look at the graduation rate, 4-year, 5-year, and 6-year snapshot. They look at the English language proficiency, again, using the NICES slat, just like they do at the elementary level. They want to see how the students, the English language learners, are doing. Chronic absenteeism is very similar. The college career and civic readiness measure, which we did very well on, is kind of a composite of some of the items that I listed there on the slide. They don't really share exactly how that's derived, but those are some of the factors that go into it. And again, as with the elementary and middle level, beginning in the 2021 accountability cycle, school suspension data will also be included. So what is RH's status for 2019-20? The district is a district in good standing. However, we have also been identified as a potential target district, a potential TSI district for 2021. And the reason for that is that Roth Junior High School has been identified as a potential TSI school for 2021. And as I said, if you have at least one school that's in that category, your district then becomes a target district as well. So, and we'll get into the reasons why Roth is in that situation in just a moment. I will tell you, and I think Superintendent Wright has shared with the board, that the district is appealing this rating. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Sure. We found out just before the Christmas holiday that Ross had been identified as a potential TSI school. So we appealed the decision based on the recent reconfiguration. The notion that the model is more favorable to supporting students, especially students with special needs, which was one of the groups that we were identified for. And then we also we were able to track certain cohorts to show that when students get to high school, the outcomes are much better. So we are waiting to hear back from the state regarding the appeal. As Pat will talk to you more about, the appeal, if the state granted our appeal, it really only buys us 1 year. We need to look at a more comprehensive approach, and really, as the presentation goes on, I'm sure Pat's going to talk more about it. But even though Roth was identified, there are larger concerns under this new model, because there are Pat talked about the fact that there are so many different measures that we have to pay attention to. and you're compared against like schools within a peer group. So it's, while Roth right now is front and center because of the potential TSI designation, we really have to look at, making some decisions that are going to shore us up at Berger, because the junior high model can be difficult to protect against unwanted designations. But then we also had some concerns at Sherman as well. So it's a bigger conversation than just Roth. Sorry, that was the long way around.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. So in kind of breaking down what's behind our status, first starting with some good news. At the elementary middle level, there's some very positive trends taking place in this year's data. There was good growth and performance among our English language learners across K-9, the whole span. We also started to notice some improvement in students with disabilities performance and growth at the K-6 level. And as you know, that's been a persistent concern in the district. K-12 is their achievement relative to the general population. So that's a good signal. There was also good performance and growth across the elementary schools for our economically disadvantaged subgroup, and low absenteeism among most of our subgroups as well. So those are definitely positive signs to build on. In terms of the areas to monitor and areas where we may need some improvement, overall in the district, the ELA academic progress of our Black and Hispanic students is low. It's relative to all students. It's at a level 1 or level 2 in several of our buildings. So that's definitely something that we want to be working on as we look at interventions and so forth, and the school improvement plans. At File, there was a flag for the growth factor for Black students, for African American students. That subgroup was identified last year as well, so that is something that definitely needs to be worked on in their school improvement process. And also absenteeism for Asian and white students, which is concerning, especially given the size of the white student subgroup. So all things that File is definitely going to be focusing on. At Sherman, as Bo mentioned, there are several subgroups where the performance is on the cusp. Obviously, Sherman wasn't identified the way Roth was, but that's only because of the combination of ones. They did not have that one in that one growth measure that's heavily weighted that Roth did, and that's why they escaped that designation. But they are definitely at risk with some of these student subgroups as we look at their progress and their achievement. So these are things that obviously we're going to be working on through Dina Wilson's office and with the principals. So at Roth, what got us the identification were two subgroups, the Hispanic subgroup and the students with disabilities subgroup, both of which had level 1s for growth and achievement. And they also had level 1s in some of the other measures, which is why it turns into a target school. So again, Roth is still in good standing for this academic year, but they're at serious risk of becoming a TSI school in 2021. And I'll get to some highlights of what the Roth staff is working on in just a moment. Also at Roth, we're keeping an eye on a few other subgroups too. There are performance and growth concerns throughout that school in a number of subgroups in a number of different areas. And at Berger, again, Bo alluded to the middle level and the challenges at that middle level, especially with the 7th and 8th grade performance. And Berger has several subgroups that are below where they need to be. And that's something we're going to continue to monitor. And I think we're going to take a look at the junior highs collectively as well in terms of what other resources, what supports, what strategies should we be looking at to rectify this. So at Roth, Carrie Macko and her team have launched a very robust response to this already, and they had a faculty meeting that Bo and Dina and I attended last week, where Carrie laid out some overarching goals for the improvement plan, which she called the Road to Improvement, and started getting the staffs, the teachers and faculty's input on that. Here are just some of the strategies they're looking at as they develop their plan. One, obviously, they're going to look at these particular subgroups that we've talked about and really look student by student to identify where are those needs and how can we match the interventions to those needs. They're going to engage in continue their staff-wide discussion on quality first instruction. And what she asked the teachers to do is between now and the next faculty meeting, go back to the SIP plan as you meet with your teams and so forth, and identify strategies that are already in our school improvement plan that you think are going to be those high return, high payout strategies that are going to have some impact on the students between now and the end of this school year, and then going into the future as well. For example, one of the focuses at the building is on school-wide literacy and all the content areas. So that might be an area that they really intensify their focus on. And at the same time, the district is also there in terms of what resources do you need, what support do you need, what time do you need, et cetera, to make that happen. So they're going to come back at their next faculty meeting, and the teachers are going to share some of their thoughts on what would be the high impact strategies that we can all commit to move the needle. They're also going to continue to renew their emphasis on relationship building, outreach to parents, especially around chronic absenteeism or student performance, even in terms of outreach around the kids who sit for the exam and in terms of the opt-outs and the test refusals, because those are not helping the data as well. That is factoring in. Karen outlined that for Dean and me last week. That does lower, and Roth had a significantly larger test refusal rate than Berger, for example. So there are some interventions that with students, with parents, that might be able to get at that. Also the progress monitoring process, that's something that's been ongoing at Roth in terms of looking how they use data, looking at how they then match the data with the appropriate intervention for that student or that subgroup. So those are going to continue to be their priorities. Moving to the high school level, a lot of good news, as we're accustomed to. The all students group was level 4 in 6 out of the 7 measures, so the school as a whole, the performance really is doing very well. For graduation, again, level 4 for all students, we far exceed the state measures and the state goals on graduation rate, including most of our subgroups. And there was some improvement with our students with disabilities graduation rate, which has been a very stubborn area for us in terms of having students with disabilities graduate on time while still getting the supports they need to be successful, and they moved to a level 3. So that's a pretty
That's
positive
one of the pieces
trend.
of data that we cited in the appeal.
Exactly.
Because that subgroup was identified. The graduation rate, I believe, last year rose to just under 80%.
It was high 70s.
That's what we cited.
Yep.
And 80% is the state's goal for all students. So that was a piece of good news.
Yep, so that's very much a celebration. And then all of our composite performance measures for all the subgroups on the composite measure, which for high school is ELA, math, and graduation, we're at a 3 or a 4. So that's really something to celebrate. And all of our college and career readiness measures were at 4. In terms of concerns or things that we're watching at the high school and continuing to work on with Dr. Schaefer and his team, is the ELA academic progress for 2 subgroups, Asian students and students with disabilities. So that's something where they're diving into that data to kind of identify, all right, what are the standards that the kids are missing, or what are some of the areas where there's gaps that we can address. And chronic absenteeism, again, last year you might recall that we did get a level 1 for the Asian student subgroup at the high school, and we ended up having to do a brief plan addressing that for the state as part of our Title I application. This year it's white students and multiracial students. So they're delving into that in terms of, who are the frequent flyers and what's causing that rate. Because your white student subgroup is your largest subgroup. So that's definitely a concern when that's at a 1 or a 2. So, so we're definitely keeping a close eye on that. Questions?
Questions? Margaret?
So, we're compared, like you said, 3rd through 8th grade, 9th through 12th. All of our 8th graders take earth science. So how do you compare, so are our 8th graders then compared to
other students in 8th grade who are taking earth science.
Other students,
Mhm.
okay, so
Yep.
what's kind of unfair about that, and I know it's a state thing, not our thing, but, we essentially accelerate everybody.
Correct.
All 8th graders, even students with disabilities, take earth science and are expected to take the regents. And other schools, earth science is accelerated. Like, so those 8th graders are your top students taking.
Well, we're not being compared with those schools. We're being compared with others. Those students are
Other
being compared
schools
with
do
other
it.
students that are taking earth science in
Okay.
8th grade. So it's their starting point, their baseline is the same.
Okay.
So it's a matter of how did they do
So it's
relative to
other
that.
schools that everybody.
Other
in
students
8th grade-
throughout the state. It may not be other school districts as a whole. It's wherever those students are. There may be 20 students in this school or 40 students in another school. That,
But do you understand
it's
what I'm
comparing
saying?
apples to apples.
But it's really not. Like, I'm pushing back, and I know this is not your
No,
thing,
that's good.
But, other schools, if, other 8th graders that take a Regents course, whether it's bio or earth science, I know different neighboring districts, some start with bio, some start with earth science.
Right.
Those kids are a select few. They're accelerated.
Oh, I know that.
They are
Mm.
like your top students.
Right.
All of our students take it,
Right.
even kids who struggle. And so all of our students, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes,
Like,
our-
all of
and
our
what I'm saying
students
is
are
our
being compared to,
No, they're not. Our special ed students taking earth science are being compared with other special ed students taking earth science. Our poor students taking
Okay.
earth science are being compared with other poor students taking earth science.
okay.
Do
Are they
you see the
same age?
difference? 8th graders, because it's being substituting for the science 8 measure.
Okay, so they're the same age then, and I'm sorry. that
No, I'm glad you asked the question. That's a good clarification.
It just, because I'm concerned, like, a lot, when we switched with the reconfiguration, a lot of supports that were in place have been taken away. Like, and with the junior high schedule, I brought up to the board, there's no time, there's no extra time for teachers to give kids extra help, like the schedule is. And so I'm concerned about that. We have less time than high school does to teach those Regents courses. Like, I don't know, when you're talking about, strategies to improve, I think time with teachers would help that. I don't know, or at least do something.
I think there's instructional factors too.
Yeah.
With the time you have.
Huh?
With the time you have,
Right.
there's
Like,
instructional
there's
changes.
bigger class sizes, shorter time, and you're expecting the same results, or hoping for the same results, but like, with the whole reconfiguration, I think back to when we were in middle school, we had a science coach in the building, we had more time, the earth science teachers had AIS, and we also had time at the end of the day that was the teacher's contract, like to offer extra help. I feel like a lot of those things have been taken away, and I think without those supports, and I'm not saying earth science, but it's not earth science, it's Anthony LA, but they're in the same boat as earth science, because they had coaches too, and they had that AIS. And again, more time, like, longer class, so, I don't know, thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
I think it's important to remember the earth science is only a small component, it's averaged in with
Right.
the algebra, the ELA.
Right. The ELA and math have
Yeah,
much more
right.
weight
So when you
than
look
science.
at, when it was over 20-some different little indicator boxes, it's just one area, so let's say it's about 1/20th
It shows up only
of the whole
once.
thing.
right.
So, point when we're taking about earth science, we all have our concerns about earth science, I'm not misinterpreting anything you said around that. I understand, I just want to clarify that people understand that earth science is not the premise of this data.
No.
And I
This
didn't
is
mean,
not.
I am so sorry. I just wanted clarification.
Yeah,
like
I
how
understand that. I just wanted the
students
board to
were being-
understand how that calculation
No,
is.
so I didn't
Yeah.
mean it was earth science.
Yeah.
So, as they're collecting that data across the board, is there information coming back to say, hey, these are the things that are working really well as a benchmark for us, if you will? You know, is there a feedback loop?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So when you look at the school, if certain students are doing really well, is there quantitative and qualitative data that identifies what they're doing in that student's school, and then we can look at that and say, these are good benchmarks?
Like best practices?
Best
or-
practices.
Oh, I mean, do we have?
Well, we do get data back, by grade levels, by classrooms, and, when we do find that we have certain sections that are performing very well, we do take the opportunity to talk to those teachers. And even with our local measurements, the teachers work in PLCs and they work together, and the teachers are very collaborative, say, hey, I saw that all your kids got question 20 correct, that's to this standard. What are you doing that I might be doing differently?
I was
So-
thinking more global, outside of us, because that's a powerful resource, right, if it was,
Well,
but if
we
it's not,
get,
that's okay.
yeah, we get specific information back from our state assessments down to the standards, how many of our kids in our district are doing well on this ELA or math standard compared to the kids in the state and in the county within our district. And every year, the teachers and the principals go through that feedback from the actual assessment to really hone into what areas we need to work on and what areas we're doing well. And when we do our board reports in the fall, where we explain out how we did on our state assessments, we point some of those areas out, and then the principals put them in their school improvement plans. And then what happens is, 6 months later, we're getting a report from the state that took the mathematical calculations from the assessments that we do get specific data feedback from, and it's very thorough. It's called the Winning Rick data. It's Western New York Information Center sends it to us. And then what the state does is just takes the numbers to do all the calculations around the ESSA requirements around all those different subgroups in our totality as a district. So the feedback comes over the summer based off of the actual assessments to the standards that trickle all the way down to the schools, and teachers do get that information.
Thank you.
So do they do it for 1 year and then they give you the designation saying this is a targeted school? So do they take 1 year data from the state tests?
They're taking 1 year of data on some measures. They're taking a 3-year look back on other measures, including the growth. That's part of the reason why our primary schools still have a growth measure this year, because they're still looking back to a year, 3 years ago, where they had 4th and 5th graders. Next year, they won't get one because now we'll be more than 3 years within the reconfiguration. So the growth model actually is looking back over multiple years. The achievement measures are for that current year, like that year's graduation rate or that year's ELA results.
'Cause I'm curious to know why, because Roth is, the two subgroups are, there's a big gap between in performance, and I'm curious to know if that's something that we kind of seen coming up leading to this, or is it something that there's a big shift?
Well, I would say none of this data here surprised us. I mean, we've seen this even overall. We told you there's been a downward trend with some state results. We also have our NWA maps data that we look at. And based off when we looked at our internal data over the last year and what we see in the state data, we were predicting some of this. The final calculations is once we're compared to those like schools and students. However, seeing where our trend data has been going, remember back in the fall I did the pluses and the minuses, and I told you that in ELA, if you look over a 3-year, they were all negatives, and that's where I was getting a little concerned. So I don't know how other schools are doing, but I do know how we're doing. So because of the downward, the decline we've had, we have been concerned. There is no doubt about it. We have some pockets where we're seeing some, steady growth and even some increases. However, like 6th grade's been a great grade level for us, doing very well for the last 2 years. But then we have to, look at the whole 3-year look back to that. So we don't have a crystal ball, and we can't run calculations like the state does, because we don't know how other schools are doing, But the good news is we do have some good insights, and our internal assessments are mirroring basically what we're finding out with our state assessments. So we're getting in-time data and results from like the MAPS data, the common assessments they can look at and work with kids during the year and not just wait for the state assessment.
Just to give you an idea of the complexity of this state accountability data, if you imagine an Excel spreadsheet, this has two subgroups that Karen was showing and walking Dean and I through. This is a 4-page document. This is 2 rows of an Excel spreadsheet. This 4 pages, that's how wide it goes across with all the different measures and calculations that go into your 1, 2, 3, or 4.
The difficult part is that growth counts so much.
Right.
And growth is hard something for us to measure. Our MAPS data, I mean, you know, Jen, you see this, that does show you growth because they set targets for the kids, but it's not the same kind of growth measurements that the state is doing. That's the mystery one for us. The achievement is a lot more clear cut.
And in a way, an accelerated group is tougher because they're starting at a much higher baseline. It's tougher. It's actually tougher to show growth with that group.
I think I missed in the beginning. So what happens if a school in the district is a target school?
We're going to have to develop, if they get to that point, they're going to have to develop an improvement plan for the state. There's going to have to be surveys that are conducted. The state will come in and monitor what's going on. They'll be in classrooms. They'll be doing audits and observations and things like that. They'll be making recommendations. And then hopefully, during the time span of your improvement plan, however long they give you, you'll be able to show enough progress that they'll take the heat off.
And so it's just a label, like it doesn't affect funding that's given for things?
No, if anything, you possibly might get more. I'm thinking the district as a target district, since we have Title I, we might actually get some additional funding that we could then, allocate to broad.
All right. Quick question?
Well, a quick question. I just wanted to mention that one thing with students with disabilities that was brought up last year by teachers is that the way special education services are delivered at Roth now currently is different than the way in the past where special education teachers also had a dual certification in a content area and were paired with a content area specialist, and that has changed in the last couple of years. This is more of a comment, sorry.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And our exciting board policy and triannual review. Sue, do you want to step up? Hi, I saw you back there.
Yes, sure.
All right. I know how Bob used to go through policy by policy. George, I saw all the stuff that you sent, and I think, Emery, did you send something?
I didn't send them, but last year he let us just send the typos later.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, there were
A lot of typos. Do we want to go policy by policy? Is that?
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I had this up throughout all the different policies, is the pronouns his and her. I don't know if that's a discussion that we want to bring up now. I read on the onboard, George happened to bring it about the pronouns and making them more they, their, that kind of thing. So I have that marked throughout, so I don't know if that's something we want to look at and change, or it's the student rather than his or her or anything like that, because I have it marked.
So to come up with a common language, either the student or
they or
they.
their, or
Maybe
rather than he or she.
them. Maybe the
Yeah.
policy committee could have that conversation and then come back with a recommendation to us or something.
Okay.
So that will cut down most of my
It
costs.
absolutely would.
Policy committee just loves to do all this stuff, so
Just send it to
just send it to them. Okay. First policy is 500.
5,000.
I'm sorry, 5,000.
Milan had a couple of minor change suggestions. in the first bullet, could we, instead of to develop, could we say to develop and implement learning programs? And later in that same bullet, there's a typo, students. The L needs to be moved over, and the space needs to be, so learning.
Okay. So this would be considered minor, or do you want it to go, okay.
Unless you wanted to go.
I think, minor change? Okay. 5010?
I'm not gonna mention the typos that already, Karen already had.
Any
Norlan
questions?
suggested we might want to take out zealously out of that last sentence.
Oh,
Of
okay.
the first paragraph, I'm sorry.
Okay, will be protected. I have no problem.
It's one of my favorite adverbs.
All right.
I have a comment on the fifth bullet, to report or appeal allegations of intimidation. I know that throughout our policies about intimidation, it's generally referring to, that's the word that we're using related to bullying, but I'm wondering if we might add intimidation/bullying, just so it's clear in this, that that's what it's talking about.
I have no problem with that.
You know, if you're not reading the other stuff, don't. Right.
Minor. Okay. Next, 5015.
Would it make more sense to, under number 1, that second sentence is kind of awkwardly worded? Would it make more sense to kind of flip it and say the Board of Education will consider an appeal only when all appropriate levels of appeal have been exhausted?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in
Okay.
paragraph 1, the first sentence, could we just strike "made to it" at the end? And just say criteria for reviewing appeals, period?
I'm sorry, Pat, where are you again?
In the first paragraph, first sentence,
Okay.
the end of that sentence, it says reviewing appeals made to it. Couldn't we just strike "made to it"?
Okay.
Thank you.
First read?
That's a lot of change. Should have had a chance to read it.
Okay. Next policy is 5100.
Norlan has requested that we move this to policy committee because there have been many changes to the attendance policies and practices.
So it's going to policy.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
I'd like it
policy.
if possible, yeah.
Okay. 5110. Any problems with that one? Okay. Yolanda?
Yeah, there's a couple of changes, and I was wondering.
5110?
Yeah, 5110, oh, sorry, I'm at home, sorry.
No, no.
There's only like 3 cents.
Strike.
Okay. It's okay. 51 5110R.
That one I think needs to go to policy. George had brought up some concern after the parent appeal last year around clarifying what extenuating circumstances means.
Okay.
And Andy and Norlan also have some changes to consider.
Attendance areas. 5140. It's good. 5150. Any discussion? Okay, 5150R, regulation.
There's just some couple instances where it says just parent and all the other ones say parent/guardian, so just consistency. In number 1, it's there twice, and then in number 3. And
So how do we
keeps
want
going.
it? How do
Sorry.
we want
I
it
can
to-
give them to you, I have them.
Does
Just
it,
parent/guardian, just be consistent with
Okay.
the
Okay, with all of
policies.
it.
Just on item 2, on that one, it's 5150R. Is a baptismal record really acceptable as documentation of age?
Yes.
yes?
Learn something new every day.
First read or minor with it just being consistent with parent guardian?
I think minor with the language. 5150. Any questions?
5151?
5151, I'm sorry.
Could we, in the second paragraph and the fifth paragraph, could we change student services to student and family services?
Where are you looking?
5151.
In the second and fifth paragraph, it says Office of Student Services. We change it to Student and Family Services.
Oh, right here, okay.
And also George had mentioned in the second paragraph to take out the word legal.
Right, but you could also shorten that up a little bit just by saying confirms that the parents or guardians reside within the school district. I mean, it just shortens it up a little bit, doesn't change anything at all, but the legal should come out because it's just, it implies that there has to be some form of order, which there doesn't have to be.
Okay.
Shorten it? Confirms the parents or guardians?
Confirms that the parents or guardians reside within the school district. That gets you your pronoun.
Yes, it is.
And first read or minor?
First read.
The last line as well, has to have student
Yep.
and families.
Yes, okay.
5152.
This probably has to come to policy because there's been a change in the law that needs to be reflected in it.
$51.53.
George had a change.
Did you understand this question, Yolanda? I mean,
I didn't see that.
this is, I was suggesting that when someone's going to be moving, they know that they're going to be moving in the course of the year from one homeschool district to another homeschool district, can they pre-enroll in the new one? Because you're allowed to do that if you're moving in from out of the district. I was just trying to make it similar to that. Does that make sense what I'm saying? You live in Winslow, you're going to be moving to Leary.
Correct.
And you know that. Can you start out at Leary even though you haven't moved yet?
Sometimes we'll make exceptions.
But it doesn't say that here, but it's something you're allowed to do if you're moving into the district. You can start.
Yep, you can, as long as you show.
So I was just suggesting that the policy should have something similar for within district
If you-
moves.
Especially if you're gonna build, and you can show proof that you're in the process of building.
That would probably need to go to policy.
Policy?
Policy?
Yes. 5154. Placements. 5155.
We're going to need to bring this to policy. There's been a lot of changes.
We have to take that.
Is that okay? I can give you 5160.
George had one comment. On the left-hand side where it says impassable roads, the second line, it should be individual, not individuals. Underneath reason and definition, the third item, impassable roads.
Right.
The second line.
That was one of the
Cross
typos.
off the S.
Okay.
This one probably should go to policy too. There's been some changes in process that need to be updated.
All right, 5161. Truancy, any changes? 5162, student dismissal, precautions. Anything? 5162R. Anything? 5180.
George had one thing underneath long-term early release of 12th graders.
Yeah.
First line, the apostrophe should come off of grader.
Graders.
Minor?
Minor. 5191. Any questions?
At the very end here, under HIV/AIDS instruction, I proposed making some changes to that very first sentence. It currently reads, "Superintendent of schools is hereby directed to develop administrative guidelines in regard to the development, implementation, and evaluation of HIV/AIDS instruction." And I proposed saying the superintendent of schools or his designee, or his or her designee, or however you want to now frame it, is hereby directed to assist in the development, implementation, and evaluation of HIV/AIDS instruction. Because I don't think it's applicable. We wouldn't be developing an administrative guideline for this sort of curriculum work. Does that make sense?
Oh, do I have it right? The superintendent of schools or designee is hereby directed
I think that should,
to
yeah, that's kind of significant enough to know.
Better go back to policy.
Okay.
I like the way you just did that, Karen. Just his slash her, just put her designee.
And 5200.
Is the exhibit okay?
Anyone have any problems with the exhibits?
Is that the current exhibit?
Okay.
Sorry.
Benefit, okay. 5200, co-curricular, extracurricular programs.
The first word of the second paragraph, interscholastic, isn't that an adverb? Shouldn't it be followed by interscholastic athletics or interscholastics? Or does it make, just by, something's missing there.
Well, it's the first in a series, and then
But interscholastic what?
Yeah.
activities. See, it's interscholastic, comma, performing arts, comma, and other co-curricular and extracurricular, boom, activities.
They're all modifying activities.
We could use an Oxford comma in there while we're at it, but.
Right. Well. Okay.
So are we leaving it or adding activities? Leave it?
What do you think?
Jim says it's okay.
Makes sense to
Jim
me.
says
I mean,
it's
I would
okay.
throw a comma in before and, but, I mean, that's a style issue.
Okay. So we'll leave it. Are we okay with this? Okay.
Yep.
Here, I think,
Right here?
before and.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse me. 5200R, regulation. Uh, 5210.
Just need a space in the second paragraph, first sentence, students, comma, faculty. Second paragraph, first sentence on 5210. Just a
It needs to get uploaded. Does someone check over the board docs or?
Board docs retyped all the ones that I had already went through and had corrected, so now we have to do them all again, because there's a lot of typos in them
Yeah,
throughout.
so these tables and spaces, they're their issue, but they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
5210, okay? 5220? Any questions? 5240? 5240? Student fundraising, 5251,
Just that minor typo that George pointed out.
okay. 5251R. Anyone? The exhibit, 5251E. Any changes needed?
Hmm.
5252.
George, what's your question?
Andy, my question was, it calls for the investment of those funds. If you do it, that's fine, I
Yeah,
wonder.
we do earn a nominal amount of interest on those accounts, so there is some sort of earnings that,
And you prorate them back into the accounts?
well, if the central treasurer has a need, that's the first usage, and then what's left over, they get prorated. I mean,
I just wondered if it created more of a problem than itself.
if interest rates ever go back up, it might become.
Well, if you're okay with it, I looked at it and thought that sounds like an awful lot of work for 25 cents a quarter or whatever.
Right.
Okay, if you're fine with it, I wasn't
Yeah.
sure. Okay,
So it's okay as is?
that's fine. It was more curiosity as to whether you really went
Well,
through that
quite
exercise.
frankly, it probably just accumulates for a few years until it becomes meaningful.
Okay. 5260. $52.80. Any questions?
George had one.
George had a question about concussion protocols?
Yeah, that's actually the R1. It talks about the concussion protocols, but it doesn't reference where they are or how you would look at them or.
It's number three
Number three.
on the regulations.
It's 5280-R.1, and it's number
Three.
3, and it says, in case of suspected or actual head injury, students must be removed from play immediately. The district's concussion management protocols determine readiness to resume. I just wondered if there'd be a reference to where those would be, and I was just,
I changed it to the district concussion management protocols will be followed.
Right, but he's asking about those protocols.
Where are they?
Yeah.
In the nurse's office.
are they a policy or regulation anywhere?
It's a whole booklet of protocols.
So it's not part of the policy book or reference?
No, it's
Part
a
of the-
state guideline.
Okay, that's fine.
And on, first, on our point 1, it's just parents/guardians in number 2 again.
Oh, yeah, but it's not part.
So did you get your lines changed, Karen?
I did not.
And number 3, concussion management protocols will be followed instead of determine readiness to resume participation.
Thank you. Minor, still?
Yeah, it's a
No,
minor.
can we send that to
First read?
policy?
Yeah.
Full policy?
5280 R.2.
Should it say, I'm sorry, should it say where those protocols are? Like, maybe in the bottom here, that's where I'm located? Should it
Where the pol-
mention that?
We can bring it in policy, and we can add it in policy, maybe.
Just a thought.
I-
'Cause it refers to
I'd like to
protocols
discuss it
here.
in policy.
It's going to policy stuff.
Right.
I'll add that to it.
Is that your question, Sue, what you want to discuss?
No.
This other stuff?
Yeah.
5280 R.2. Interscholastic athletes. 5300. Any questions? 5303.
Milan, in the first paragraph, where it lists respect, dignity, and equality, Milan suggested we add equity. Respect, dignity, equity, and equality.
Like the first sentence, is that?
First sentence of the whole.
Oh, that's good. Any other suggestions, Milan? Any other suggestions? No? Okay.
Minor?
That's minor.
I'm not sure I like that.
First, it's a first read, that's a substantive change.
Okay.
Adding equity is something big,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
It's not just equality, it's
Equity?
equity and equality, so you should first read.
First read it, okay. (5303R).
I just made a suggestion on the third page, under Dignity Act coordinators, to have it read, one or more employees at every school shall be designated. I just thought it read a little, it doesn't change the meaning, because it's one or more, which makes it mandatory, because it says shall. So the sentence would read, under Dignity Act coordinators, one or more employees at every school shall be designated as the Dignity Act coordinator, and it fits in with the parentheses S's that are used. At least it seems to me that it reads better.
I have another question on the second page, where it says gender, there's an asterisk at the end.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know.
I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I was looking everywhere, I don't know what that asterisk is for.
I think it probably is referring to the two bullets underneath, but it's, doesn't belong there, I agree.
Okay. All right, I was like, I looked everywhere, I'm like, did I miss it?
Yeah, no.
Can we just?
I did that,
Yeah.
too, and I forgot to write it.
Okay.
Minor?
Minor.
How about a page break on intervention, just so that it moves that pulls out?
We have
That's
no
spacing.
choice in how it goes on board
Oh, you
docs.
don't, okay.
No.
What is this minor or first read?
Minor.
I think
Let me do it first. Let me do it first here, just made a couple changes there.
Okay, first read. And 5305. Okay, 5305 regulation.
Okay, I mentioned this in the heading of my comments, but I didn't actually put my comment in down below. 5305R, on the very last page, in the sentence that begins, if the failed course is not completed in summer school, it reads, the student will begin the school year on academic probation. And I wondered if it shouldn't also reference the possibility that would be ineligible. I mean, there's a distinction between the academic probation. In other words, the status would continue. But academic probation and ineligibility are not interchangeable, right? They're two separate status, two types of status. So we'll begin the year on academic probation or continue ineligible.
Because even the first sentence in that paragraph says, student participants will continue their probation
Or
ineligibility
ineligibility.
during school
Right.
vacation, so I
Right.
think there needs to be an or.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Or ineligibility seems to fit there as well.
That makes sense.
Okay. Do you want to take it back to policy, or do you want to just
I
make
think
the
you
changes?
can just add that because it really is a continuation of the first sentence.
Okay. All right, so we'll do a first read on this.
No, right, thank you.
Can we just check with Tom Stewart on that? Because it seems like when we implemented this policy, there was a lot of discussion about what happens over the summer. And there could have been discussion that they wouldn't continue to be ineligible, they'd be on probation. So just,
So why don't
I
we
mean,
just
I
take
can
it-
see why they should still be ineligible, but
We We can take it
I
back.
don't remember.
I tried to send the question to Tom, but then I forgot to write down what the question was, so he
Right.
probably has no idea what I
So
was asking.
let's send it back to policy and we can find the answer.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because it'd be course time. Okay, do you want me to investigate the town? Yeah.
All right, so it'll go back to policy and then we'll find out from Tom. Okay. Great.
It's been
Thank you,
grand.
Sue. See you in the morning.
Not tomorrow morning.
Not tomorrow, but soon.
The 31st, right?
31st. All right, thank you. Next up, we have superintendent's report.
Okay, there are a number of items that were submitted as written items. The corporal punishment report, the school facilities report, extra activities report, and a memo that Andy and I put together regarding legislative lobbying points. I do want to talk about that one just a little bit, and we'll be having additional conversation around that particular memo as well. The highlights there's a lot of information there, but as we're advocating for our school district and for those school districts around us to consider the following items when you're having conversations with local legislators, which you'll have the opportunity to do that at the legislative breakfast. So one, adding pilots, payments in lieu of taxes into the growth factor within the cap. For a community like ours, that would be a very big deal because we're a district that's industry heavy and we have a lot of pilot agreements. Relief with transportation mandates is another one, especially the busing of students to charter and private schools. If we're able to get some relief there, that would be a big deal. Full funding of expense-based aid, and a couple of examples of that is transportation aid and BOCES aid as well. And then decoupling rebate checks from districts staying within the cap. And then exclusions for costs which tend to weigh heavy on districts, such as support for special needs students. As you know, those programs are very costly, and English language learners, if there were to be exclusions within the cap there. So the memo's a couple pages long, but generally speaking, those are really the 5 points. They're very similar to what we were emphasizing last year, and we'll be having some additional conversations around those legislative lobbying points. Anything to add, Andy?
No, other than the rebate check one, now is a natural time because it has been expired, so the state is looking, do they even renew it or not? So the lobby might be effective right now.
Right.
Good point. Any questions on any of the written items? Okay. Few things just as oral reminders. Did want to give a shout out to the team of people that are working on the backpack program. That's truly a collaborative effort. That's sort of the, I guess, the child of Kicking Hunger, that group. We're looking for something that would be more sustainable and would allow us to serve families in need. And Nerlan and Bonnie Coddington, Janice Hargraves, there's a team of teachers working around that and folks within the community. And we're actually, they're working hard to get that launched by February, so that by February break, families that are in need, working in conjunction with FoodLink, we would be able to support families during those extended breaks where children aren't going to be in school and families may struggle. So kudos to the team. The next step going beyond the backpack program is to try and establish our own food pantry. Do you want to say anything else about that, Nerlan? Did I cover it?
Yep.
Okay. All right. We, on February 11th, that's when we'll be doing our equity and inclusivity workshop. And if you remember from last year, that tends to be a more lengthy workshop and a bit more hands-on. So I did have some conversation, at least initial conversation with Jennifer around reordering the agenda that night so that we would start with the workshop first and then back into the rest of the meeting. That way it isn't a situation where, like last year, where the workshop comes at the back of the meeting and then you've got an hour, hour and a half meeting, and we want people to engage when folks are tired. The idea would be to get you when you're fresh. So in talking with Jennifer, she thought it would be a good idea if we, just to make sure everybody was on board with that on February 11th, if we sort of reordered the agenda in a way that we typically wouldn't. Everybody's open to trying that? We would,
whole meeting earlier.
yes. And then we would make sure that we adjust notification so that people realize that the times will be a little different than they typically are.
Start earlier or just a regular
No,
time?
you didn't mention about starting earlier.
We would start earlier, so we would actually, any executive session probably, we would go into executive session around 5:30, start the regular meeting at 6, and then the workshop would be from 6 to 7. And then we would go into public forum and everything that comes after following the workshop. Sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. Everybody's okay with that for the 11th?
Yeah.
Okay. And then just some reminders. We have the Equity and Inclusivity Committee meeting happening tomorrow in this room at 5:30. The Martin Luther King event is going to be on Thursday night at 7 o'clock in the church down the street, and I always forget the name.
Henrietta United.
There we go. The district will be closed in observance of Martin Luther King Day this coming Monday, and we have the Leary Board of Education visit on the 23rd, bright and early at 7 a.m. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
Great. New business, call for presenters for the convention. Any interest?
We might have some interest.
No?
But we haven't talked about it
They were
yet.
encouraging us to submit that proposal again, so
Okay.
that topic is a topic of interest in as well. So we thought we're gonna make some changes and we're gonna submit it again.
Great, good. All right, next it comes to board reports. Henrietta Youth Development Advisory Committee. I went to the meeting last night, and they were just preparing for the MLK, getting ready for,
Are you talking about the youth asset team or the advisory committee?
oh, I'm sorry, I talked about the youth asset.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm so excited.
I know.
It was such a good
I'm
meeting.
gonna let you.
We just talked to, the kids were getting ready for their presentation. They will be doing a presentation at the MLK celebration on Thursday, and just preparing their agendas, and they're really quite interesting. They just want to explore different areas, and then they're looking at different workshops and different things that they'll be involved in, and they will also be working on the big Henrietta Town Fall Carnival or winter thing, and there's going to be a lot of petting zoos, a lot of things for younger children, so I don't know if
It
you
was fun last year.
signed up to go.
Going
Yeah,
last year.
so that's what we did last night. Okay. And the MSCBA Legislative Committee?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I did. Let me grab my notes. Sorry, I checked out for a second. I'm back. That's the good news.
Yes, I'm gonna do it at the end. Yes.
We are
switched.
looking at, and I know it falls during a difficult time of day. It's like a lunch meeting. But we are looking for a board representative.
What day of the week is that?
It is typically on a Wednesday. So some big news there. The March advocacy trip is going to be canceled. They felt like the group didn't necessarily get what it needed out of the December trip. And they feel like, advocacy would be better served if the group were to stay local. So the effort is going to be really focused on what we need to do to advocate for ourselves here within Monroe County. So looking at a sort of shifting gears with that strategy, and they're going to be forming a committee that's going to make advocacy recommendations. A reminder about the legislative breakfast, which is on February 8th. They are looking to push attendance as far as, again, for the local advocacy efforts. And discussion around crystallizing a countywide message to legislators that the needs of suburban schools, while similar in some ways to the city, are very, very different in others. That was the gist.
Okay, and the board president's meeting I went to, they were also talking about how they had to cancel. They figured with Rich Funky and with Chris Kolb that it wasn't as impactful as it used to be. They want to definitely start doing more grassroots. They want to start getting involved more with the politicians when they announce candidacy, and they want to start building relationships with them. And we were looking at some of the proposals by Governor Cuomo at the meeting. And when I get notes, I will pass them on from the meeting. Next, we have DPAC.
And last week, the two main things out of that whole meeting, the special ed team came and did a really great presentation for the parents. Quite a few of them said they really picked up a lot of things that they really didn't know, and they said that they were very willing to go to any of the PTO meetings, to present. They're willing to, take questions from anybody. So if you know somebody has a question, give them their contact and make sure that they, contact them directly. They're a great resource, and they're a good team. They're just a good, solid team working together. The other piece was talking about the parent survey, that making sure all the questions that they gave input for were presented. Everybody was good with the questions. That's going to be administered in February, and results will be used at the March Parent Leadership Forum, which is like the first Thursday of the month. So that is it for the DPAC.
I apologize, I went out of order, Karen. May?
Okay, just took me a minute.
I'm sorry. The Henrietta Youth Development Advisory Committee.
We discussed open mic night is going to be on April 8th. The Hall of Fame applications are out, and everyone is encouraged to recommend a senior student from the high school. We'll be looking at applications on January 26th. The Winter Carnival is this Saturday at 6 p.m. with fireworks at 8:30. There's craft, face painting, slides, and there's parking available, and there's also shuttles from the senior center to bring people to the rec center. The MLK celebration is January 16th? Yeah, 16th, so that's it.
Great, and the Budget Advisory Committee?
We met last night.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
What's something to do on your birthday?
Hey, I love budget, so.
Your birthday present.
So we went through some program and service review questions that some members submitted. Literally, there was like very detailed, I was really impressed. So I don't know who it was or if there was a bunch of people, but.
It was all one person.
Yeah, I thought so, but I wasn't sure. But he really went through line by line and looked at it and really had some great questions, and it really informed a lot of the other members that sit on the committee. We went through the tax cap, revenue projections, the 5-year budget projections, enrollment data, and the budget overview update. There was an update on the budget overview. People had some questions at the beginning, but then they got kind of quiet towards the end of the meeting, so we were actually out a little early, which was like 5 minutes early.
I just wanted to watch the football game.
Well, when he said it like a game, I was like, I don't even know what to play, like what? That was it.
Great. And that brings us to board recap and preview.
Very eventful meeting. Great presentations, thanks to Andy and his team and Pat. Very informative. So Upcoming events, the Martin Luther King celebration is January 16th, and Leary visit, I didn't get that date. What is it?
The 23rd.
The 23rd. That's it. Have a good night.
Okay.
Did you want to mention something?
Just
Yeah,
a reminder.
executive.
I'll make that motion that we go into executive session
To discuss
Yes, our
contract.
contract
Negotiations.
Evaluation.
Superintendent's evaluation. Okay, moved by Diane, seconded by Nikki. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Where's some of that?